Moving on to our next presentation, which is given by Censornet, and I'm delighted to welcome Gareth Lockwood, who's the Vice President of Products for that company, and his title is Preparing the New Generation of Security Challenges. Fascinating. Cheers.
So I think I'm standing between you and the coffee break, so I'll try and keep to time. So a little bit of background before I get into this. So I've been in cyber for 20 plus years now, both sides of the desk. So I've done pre-revenue startups all the way up to enterprise, both selling product, developing product, but also buying it. I've done IT support for a long time, so I kind of get the pain and dealing with sales guys from vendors. Done that as well. So it gets kind of interesting, my perception and how I'm going to position this. Now, I've only been with Censornet a month, so go easy. Hopefully, kind of my thoughts that you'll hear are not too controversial, but I'm going to talk really around, and this is really kind of relevant because we've had some content recently put out from Gartner, which was quite surprising, being that Gartner are usually Magic Quadrant, top right, very much experts in silo products, and we're saying actually it's got to be more about consolidation and platforms as opposed to portfolios of products. So I'll be interested to gauge some of the reaction to this afterwards. But really, to start things off, and I'll reference Gartner a few times during this because it's quite relevant. We are at this interesting point in time with the threats that are affecting our customers, and we look after really the mid-market, so that kind of engine room of UK business. But really, as we've gone through the pandemic and moved into remote working and hybrid working and these ever-connected digital supply chains of IoT and autonomy, really we're seeing that the perimeter of the network expanding way, way, way faster than we ever imagined. But on the flip side to that, we're also seeing IT budgets get reduced significantly. We're seeing staff retention become more and more difficult. I'm trying to be hiring for talent for now the last 6 months, and hiring budgets are great, retention budgets are not so much. So as an IT organization, we're also dealing with that kind of tribal knowledge that sits within your teams, and knowing if someone leaves, what damage is left behind, and how do you deal with that if you're managing 30, 40, 50 different point products. So I look at Richard, who's our CTO, my work dad, as I call him. So as these risks start to develop, obviously we've been in cyber for a long time. You don't need to know how this kind of cat and mouse game continues, and you've probably heard ransomware, DDoS, all sorts of the buzzwords today. I'm kind of not going to go into that. But really, it's all about risk. And from our perspective, we're looking at how do we make it easy to reduce risk within the business, whether that's through product, whether that's through an innovation you want to deploy. But really, it's about how do you reduce that exposure. And that could be through the product or through the talent that is managing that product. And that's where we're seeing some pretty, actually some significant numbers at the moment where, if I were developing strategy going forward, I'd be pretty worried. So again, Gartner stats here, but the real crux of this message is, as an IT organization, we are managing far too many point products. You look at over a quarter of companies here are managing 20 plus products, and that gives me, as an analyst or a data scientist, as our Microsoft colleagues refer to, 90 seconds to look at an alert, make an evaluation, make a judgment, and apply an action to that. That is pretty much, it's inconceivable in today's. You'll see as we get onto some of the stats around the impact on our staff, it's actually pretty worrying. Now, in that, and this is mid-market data, so we can back this up with a lot of our customers who we talk to. They're actually missing a lot of the alerts because they just do not have the time to look at dashboard number 1, dashboard number 2. Even if you've got a relatively comprehensive SIEM integration, it's pretty complex to actually get up and running with that. And looking forward, it's pretty unsustainable. The impact on staff themselves is starting to become, although we're being more and more aware of things like mental health, the actual reality is the impact is on the business itself. And you think about the financial, the reputational damage of a breach because you miss an alert, it's pretty severe. Over 10% of the people, so we did a survey back in March this year that we called a red list. It looks at the impact of products and the industry to the actual people themselves. And there's a lot of burnout. There are people who are missing pretty severe threats because they're just purely overworked. I mean, you only look at the NHS data, for instance. An average cybersecurity analyst gets about 5.5 hours sleep a night, as opposed to the recommended 7. So it's no wonder we literally run on caffeine and energy drinks all day. So what's the problem? What's the solution? I think we need to look at how do we bring in an element of consolidation. And Censornet as a product company is all about a platform as opposed to a portfolio. And you could argue, well, actually, I don't want to put all my eggs in one basket. I want to use a handful of vendors. But 30 vendors is not the answer. A good dozen tops, I think, is probably a sweet spot. And when you apply that to the actual kind of attack surfaces that we see at the moment, 80-90+% of attacks target us, the humans. It's email, phishing attacks. But they're all cross-channel. So what may start with an email, click a link, there's a website being built up, generally OneDrive or SharePoint or Google, that is at the time of scan legitimate, but when you click that email, the weekend's gone by, and then that website is now hosting something malicious. So you need to start looking at not only the email, but the HTTP traffic, CASB. So if you have applications, how those feed out to the cloud. It is just complicated to think about this. And there's really no synergy. When we did this report, we spoke to a lot of our customers, and I was in with Fevertree, Tonic, who are a big customer zone. They said, wouldn't it be great if all you vendors shared data between yourselves? There's got to be this notion of a shared responsibility. If I'm taking an email protection product and someone else's web product and a CASB product, you should be sharing threat intel between you. Great concept, but just doesn't happen in reality. So it's really around how do we fix this problem of being overwhelmed with the threats and potentially missing these threats that are coming over the different channels. Solution simple, right? Hire more people, more IT budgets, happy days. Well, we know that's not the reality. And Gartner again actually I was quite surprised by this, but they're also moving towards this side. Gartner will talk about SASE and zero trust as that kind of end game, but actually they are saying now, those magic quadrants that talk about a pillar or a portfolio, being top right is great, but how do we pull them together to have something that is a lot more cohesive? And many of the organizations in the UK are actually already on that journey, whether they've developed something today and they're already starting to look at, well, I've got a renewal date coming up for my email product, let's wait and, or even pull something in and look at platforms. But really they're looking at this from the next kind of 12 to 18 months. How do I get to that, if you believe Gartner, utopia of SASE, but going in small stages, because it is a big ask to say, rip everything out and putting a new platform and start again. Now, again, you said you could argue that you need best of breed in this case. One thing that we've found in conversations is the balance between absolute best protection versus this blanket approach that gives you very, very, very good protection, but it brings in things like a single dashboard, a deployment in a matter of 30 seconds to a minute, pre-built rule sets and policies that you don't have to start with a blank sheet of paper. Those are actually, again, from the customers we're talking to, a lot more valuable than pure speeds and feeds when it comes to product. And if you think about it, you can kind of probably see where I'm going with this from our product's perspective. But really, it's about, over the next 18 months to kind of 2 years, to keep up with the pace of innovation, looking at how can I make small steps to develop my security platform such that it's not just a collection of portfolio products. It's not point products. It is something that is greater than the sum of their parts. While you're having multiple products, great. There may be some overlap in the protection, but the flip side is there's probably going to be some gaps as well. So that passing intelligence, Microsoft talked about UEBA, user and entity behavior analytics. So being able to tell what is the context of a user accessing something. So we use AI and ML, without going into all the detail, to just look at the anomalies. If Steve in sales is trying to access Salesforce at 11 p.m. on a Sunday night, we know that's not him. How can we then step it up and ask for a multi-factor authentication or something else? It's really just feeding in the intelligence across that platform, irrespective of the channel of attack. So 5 kind of tips for the mid-market. How do we get along that journey? First thing is, look, can I consolidate? Is there an option to consolidate now? If I've got 3 vendors giving me 3 different products of email, web, CASB, email encryption, and so on and so forth, what are the weak spots within that I should be focusing on now? I said it's not a complete rip and replace in one go. Let's look at the areas that are really, really relevant and could uplift the business. But you've got to be careful. There's a lot of buzzwords about there. I said before joining Censornet, I came from a government startup doing zero trust and a bunch of other things, and it got very, very complicated very, very quickly in talking to people. We would go off on conversation tangents around what you should do to replace a VPN. It's all about zero trust now. It should just be always on connections. Encryption needs to be quantum ready for the next generation. Actually, that's just a distraction. And you need to maintain this path of knowing what are the right products to pick, but in a cohesive platform. So secondly, and this is kind of the whole crux of the story, is complexity is the enemy of security. I think it's probably a phrase that's been bandied around a number of times about how complexity is a problem. But if we can give the analysts and the data scientists time to look at those threats by taking some of the workload away from them, surely that's a good thing, right? Third for the hat trick, decide where you need to invest in things like AI and ML. What do you want to have action over, and what do you take that is trusted plug and play? As I said, we've been doing mid-market customers for many years now, and actually we've built a set of rules and policies and a product that out of the box works for probably 90% of those guys. So they can take it, trust it does its thing, and then make a few minor tweaks as they go along. But it's about knowing which parts you want to have that human element and which parts you're happy to offload to machine learning or autonomy. And then it's about sharing that intelligence. As I said, companies are not going to share attack intel between them necessarily in an easy fashion. Everyone will say, oh, we have an API to do this. You can do it programmatically. Well, it's actually a lot more complicated in reality. So, again, it's looking at that platform where you can feed data from an email threat to a web threat to a cloud application seamlessly and let the back end do it. And last but not least, look at where you can just take a step back. It's all around going back to that Gartner data about the threat and the pressure as analysts are on. Take some of that workload away by investing in a platform. So it's a long way journey to say, hey, everything we just talked about, we do. Great. No, it's not quite that simple. So our vision as a relatively well-funded startup now is how do we feed in that multi-product into a single platform? How do we enable autonomy? How do we use identity as that killer context? Gone are the days of a perimeter within a firewall. It's about where the user is, what they're doing, and the context behind who they are. So identity is a key part of this. And then as we get out into the wider innovation as we go forward into the next few years, it's about how do we tie those together into a single cohesive story in a platform. And we are, I would say, a year down that journey already. We've got some really, really good customers already doing it. The guys are just outside. We've got some really interesting use cases that may or may not be applicable. But I think it's worth bearing in mind as you look at renewals for products, how do we get that cohesive story as a platform as opposed to a portfolio? That's us. Thank you ever so much.
Gareth.